When you think of Sweden, you might picture snow-covered streets, minimalist design, maybe even IKEA or ABBA. Defense manufacturing probably isn't the first thing that comes to mind, but maybe it should be. Here at Saab, production has been ramping up. The company reported record orders on the books, and it's not just fighter jets. Saab builds everything from missiles and radar to surveillance systems and naval platforms, capabilities few countries sustain domestically. CEO Michael Johansson describes the magnitude of the new demand.
I think if I look at our company, we have probably 4 to 5-folded output for like before the war started. So lots is happening, and I think we are underestimating the capacity of the European defense industry.
For a country of just 10 million people, that's significant. But the phenomenon is not uniquely Swedish. European defense company stocks are surging, with other major players like Rheinmetall and Leonardo reporting record years along with Saab. 4 years into the war in Ukraine, the demand driving those record numbers is no longer just crisis support. It has become a broader story about Europe's new security posture. A story echoed across the Atlantic as President Trump pushes NATO allies to spend more.
We were paying for almost all of NATO. Now they're paying for it as opposed to not paying for it.
It's a wake-up call. The European people know that we will have to stand on our own feet, be more independent.
Anders Fogh Rasmussen is the former NATO Secretary General and Prime Minister of Denmark.
For too long, we have relied on a combination of cheap energy from Russia, cheap goods from China, and cheap security from the United States. That model doesn't work any longer. Now we have to stand on our own feet. We need to shift gear. We will need to make Europe a defense superpower.
But not every country is willing or able, according to economist Jacob Kierkegaard, a senior fellow at Brussels-based think tank Bruegel.
I know we say that, Europe is rearming. But the reality is that Europe as a whole is not rearming. There is a limited number of countries that rearm. That includes at least 2 big ones. First and foremost, of course, Germany, the other one being Poland, and then a number of smaller countries, particularly in Scandinavia and other parts of Eastern Europe. And these are countries that actually do have, if you like, latent fiscal capacity. Germany, again, being the case in point. And therefore, there is a self-selection. The countries that can have both guns and butter, well, they're rearming. But those that have to choose, and by that I mean France, Italy, Spain, the UK, they are much more hesitant when it comes to significantly increasing defense expenditures.
Defense has the potential to become a stronger economic driver across Europe. The EU is targeting 50% of defense procurement to be from EU suppliers by 2030, a meaningful shift considering that after Russia's invasion, that number was roughly 25%. But meeting that goal requires production capacity, and that's where Sweden stands out. It has maintained that production capacity for the better part of a century, in part because it historically relied more on exports than other European manufacturers, and that continuity matters.
There's a, I would say, dramatic ramp up in spending right now, but there were years where there was not as much attention or investment in Europe in defense. How did Saab maintain its investments?
Well, we have never sort of dismantled sort of everything, as you are alluding to, within our company, and that goes back to our ownership, I think. Even though we are a stock exchange company, publicly listed, we have a strong owner in the Wallenberg family. And they have always been long-term and also very loyal to sort of the deterrence and defense of Sweden for many, many decades. And so we never dismantled. We continuously invested more on our own, I would say, when sort of the government didn't sort of fund everything that we wanted them to fund. And we have always been a company that takes sort of a lot of our top line and our bottom line, for that sake, to reinvest in R&D to always be relevant in the short time frame, but also long term. So we are a bit unique in that sense, I think, not only looking at relying upon governments all the time to keep our operations efficient and state-of-the-art.
Sweden has been ready to step up on defense, and its entry into NATO in 2024 sealed the deal.
As you described, Russia's invasion of Ukraine triggered an awful lot within the defense industry. It also was a wake-up call for Sweden as Sweden joined NATO. How has that affected Saab's business, if at all, Sweden's being in NATO now?
For the company, I would say all of a sudden we are involved in the common acquisitions that NATO is doing now and then from the acquisition authority within NATO, NSPA. And of course, we're much more involved in understanding where NATO is going in terms of capabilities needed short and long term, which we were actually outside, not having an insight into. We didn't come into play when it comes to acquisitions before we joined NATO, really, or when we became an invitee. It's completely different now. We have framework contracts with NATO, so we get contracts from that organization. We understand what we can be offering going forward. We work better with the alliance capability transformation organizations. So this is a big shift. And of course, it comes down to now we're a country that can be relied upon long term because we are in the alliance, and with that comes that Saab is long term trustworthy as well.
Expanded access to NATO markets brings opportunity, but it also brings pressure to scale production, invest in research, and carefully manage capital.
I think we've managed our sort of operational capital and also our capital employed in a very good way while we are sort of investing 5 times more in capacity building than we did before the war. We are investing heavily in R&D, but still we have a strong, solid balance sheet. And that is, of course, about sort of making sure that you have contracts that gives you continuous cash flow, but also that some customers are prepared to give you some advance payments so we don't have to act as a bank. So there's still more to be discussed with governments, but so far, capital-wise, we are doing well.
There was a time when in the United States, and I think in parts of Europe, there was a sense that investors, particularly institutional investors, were reluctant to invest in defense. That seems to be changing now.
It's been a big change on that side. I mean, I remember in January 22, shortly before this tragic war broke out, we had lots of discussions in Brussels about what we call the taxonomy and if this was a sustainable business, which was crazy in the way I see it, because I mean, if you have politicians saying you have a threat environment and we decide as a country that we need a defense force, of course you have to have professional and strong defense industries to create that strong defense. But that was a strange discussion about this type of business were not sort of sustainable, and investors wouldn't get an eco-label sort of stamp on their funds if they invested in defense. That, of course, sort of disappeared more or less completely, not all of it, but lots of it when the war broke out and we realized that we had to catch up. So, I mean, if you look at Saab, I think we were 45,000 shareholders before the war broke out, and we are 300,000 shareholders as we speak. So it's been a big change in the perception.
And it isn't just Saab's shareholders who are backing the ramp-up in defense production. The Swedish government is right there with them, as explained by Finance Minister Elisabeth Svantesson.
It is definitely a boost in the economy. We have 6% this year of GDP in different public investments. I think we are in the top in the EU. And of course, defense spending is one of the big investments. And we have this defense industry, it's strong. So that's important. And what I think a lot about is how could we do that? I mean, this will change the labor market, the economy. How can we have the synergy effects, and how can this will affect the labor market, the economy? How can we do it in the best way? Innovation, technique development, and so on. I mean, we are raising double defense spending just now, and it will be more. That in itself is helping, because much of what will be produced in Sweden or in Europe, of course, and so we're helping that way.
But not all European financial institutions are as supportive of the move into defense spending, especially when it comes to multilateral lenders like the European Investment Bank.
I think much too little has been done. I know that the European leaders, when they meet in their biannual or every quarter, every time they usually have a sentence that says, "Oh, the EIB and other multilateral lenders should do more." But we're 4 years into this war, and the direct funding, for instance, from the EIB and other multilateral lenders to European defense is very limited. The direct involvement also of, say, European pension funds remain very limited. And I think that is, quite frankly, a clear policy failure, and what I would call initial executive institutional inertia. You have not had leaders in these institutions, both the policy institutions and the private sector institutions, to basically push this. I think it's a mistake, but it obviously hasn't prevented private capital, venture funding and others from flowing into the sector. And with the equity valuations increases that we have seen, the increase in European funding, venture capital funding in the sector as well, but it has been largely despite the traditional pillars of the European financial system in the large banks, in the pension funds, and in the policy lending institutions of the European Union.
And that may be an important reason why Sweden is punching above its weight when it comes to defense. A combination of being prepared, having the support of investors, and recognizing an urgent need.